Hello, everyone. Good morning. On behalf of the Nature Conservancy and the Arizona Thrives Alliance, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to Manufacturing Month webinars. My name is Nicole Hill. I lead the Arizona Thrives Alliance, a coalition of business and community organizations working together to put Arizona on the path to net carbon neutrality by 2050. The growth of the electric vehicle industry in the Valley has been exciting for so many reasons. Companies like Nikola, Lucid Motors, Core Power are not only bringing advanced manufacturing jobs to the region, but they're also on the cutting edge of new technologies that would be critical to moving Arizona and the nation towards a low carbon future. Electric vehicles and battery technologies being developed and deployed in the Valley are essential to reducing automobile pollutants that degrade our air quality and contribute to long-term respiratory health effects. And we are excited that the Valley is the center of this technology. I'm excited to hear more about the growth of this industry from our panelists this morning. And I encourage our audience to share their questions in the chat this morning so that we can add some of their questions to the discussion. At this juncture, I'd like to introduce Chip Scutari with S&C Communications. Chip will be our moderator this morning and get us started. Chip, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Nicole. Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank our amazing panel. And I want to quickly introduce everyone, and then we'll jump right into the questions. And everyone on Zoom, thanks for joining today. First off, we have Mark Hagedorn, who's Vice President of Operations for Core Power. Mark, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you're busy. Thank you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have to him is Daniel Witt, who's Head of State and Local Public Policy for Lucid Motors. He's got one of their cars behind him. It looks like he's driving up on his ear. That's awesome. And then we have down below, we have Marisa Walker, who's kind of the Swiss Army knife of the Arizona Commerce Authority and an expert in all things EV. Marisa, it's great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you too, Chip. Thank you. And
last but certainly not least, Steve Zylstra, President and CEO of the Arizona Tech Council. Steve, good to see you. Well, let's jump into the questions. It seems that Arizona has been on quite a roll lately when it comes to electric vehicles and with batteries. In just the last 20 months, Arizona has had 3 EV manufacturing groundbreakings. Lucid, as Daniel knows, Nikola and Electromechanica. Then in late July, Core Power announced the construction of a lithium-ion battery manufacturing facility in Buckeye. It's a million square foot plant that will support up to 12 gigawatt hours of battery cell production. So we have a lot of amazing things going. So let's jump in with the questions. Let's start with Daniel, and then we'll go to Mark. So he'll be ready. After extensive national searches, I know Lucid looked at dozens and dozens of sites across the country. Why did Lucid ultimately choose Arizona to expand and grow at such a crucial time in for your company?
Yeah, well, again, Chip, thanks for having all of us to talk about this really exciting topic. It's not just, as you note, about the promulgation of the electric vehicles themselves, or as Mark noted previously, sort of this systemic change to the grid supply and everything that comes from that. But it's also just frankly additional commerce and business that's going to drive a completely new segment of the economy for Arizona. That's part, candidly, of what really brought us to this area, is that we felt that Arizona was one of just a few areas that we could actually create a building from a ground up as a state-of-the-art facility. But I would tell you, it isn't just any one thing, and a lot of what attracts a lot of companies to Arizona is what attracted to us. It's the friendly business economy. It's the proximity to a large supplier base. It is a large workforce availability, because frankly, we're talking about having over 6,000 people employed directly an hour outside of the Phoenix Metroplex, and a little more than an hour outside of the Tucson area. So we need to be able to pull people out of those urban centers to ultimately come and work here. But I would say, we would not be where we are today without all of those things coming into place, especially the fact that just over a year ago, we were just turning dirt. And now we have 1 million square feet under roof with cars coming out the assembly line. And now we're talking about tripling. We're already going vertical on the space to triple that space right next door. So it's about quickness. It's about everything. Arizona has been a great partner all the way from the local level up to the state.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Mark, Core Power could have picked anywhere in the country, and I'm sure other states wanted you to be in their states. Why Arizona? Why Buckeye?
So that's a great question. As you know, you've probably heard me talk about before, we went through quite an extensive search across the nation to finally wind up in Arizona and ultimately Buckeye. But like Daniel says, it's a whole ecosystem thing for us. So, you know, we love the local commitment that is being made in Arizona to bring in electric vehicle OEMs, which, you know, are essentially one of our customers. At the same time, between the local colleges and universities, they have the research, they have the employee training, and they have all the things that build a better workforce for us, which again, you know, we're not quite as big as Lucid, but you know, we're about halfway there maybe. And so that employee base is a really big deal. On top of that, and this may sound sillier, that's, you know, it seems like something that's more operational, but Arizona has very few natural disasters, and the weather is actually great for battery manufacturing, and that it's dry. And so there's even smaller, subtler things that really brought us to the area, and then really lastly, the infrastructure and logistics that are already existing in the area, whether it be, you know, kind of that dedicated run from the port of Long Beach, you know, for raw materials and exports, as well as all the freeway system with free access to the West Coast, as well as basically kind of a gateway to the eastern part of the country. You know, it's centrally located, and we have access to everything. So that's sort of why we ultimately landed there in Arizona.
Thanks for that, Mark. Let's go to Marisa and Steve. Marisa, how has Arizona over the last 2 or 3, 4 years, I know it's been a concerted effort, what has Arizona done to position itself as an attractive place for EV manufacturers and for battery cell technology? And, you know, what's fueled, you know, these recent announcements? What's been going on behind the scenes that people don't see until they hear about the announcements?
Probably a lot of intentionality, Chip, to be candid with you. And it started quite a bit longer than 3 or 4 years. I think we're really right now beginning to really enjoy the heavy work that everybody, including those on this call, and a lot of our partners, as Daniel mentioned, from the local to the regional up to where I'm located at the state level. When the Commerce Authority, just from that perspective, was started a little over a decade ago, you know, we put a lot of emphasis around advanced manufacturing, and you may have seen some reports that came out just recently from EMSI that indicated that Arizona is now ranked second nationally in the growth around advanced manufacturing jobs between 2016 to 2020. And so a lot of effort going in, and I know my colleague Steve will be able to talk a lot about just the important regulatory environment that goes to support that. But it's really this level of collaboration and really being extremely focused on what we're trying to grow. We've also put a tremendous amount of energy around creating, we've talked a little bit about this ecosystem around supporting innovation in the state. And I think when you start to couple that with what Mark and Daniel were outlining around some of these other core ingredients that make Arizona so attractive, it's really been a labor of love for over a decade now, and we're starting to see the results of it. So it's really exciting. We're so happy to have both Mark and Daniel have a footprint in Arizona and doing such exciting things.
Great, thank you. Steve, I know a lot of your career has been around clean tech, clean energy, renewable energy. What do you think's fueled, piggybacking on what Marisa has said, what has fueled this successful push to be a hub for EV manufacturers and for battery cell technology? Oh, you're on mute, Steve, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Frankly, I think we checked just about every economic development box you can imagine. It was already discussed the importance of the workforce. The tech workforce really began here at advanced manufacturing after World War II with the growth of the aerospace and defense industry. Galvin moved Motorola here in 1949. And, the tech industry and the manufacturing industry just continued to grow. So we have low corporate taxes. 2011, we dropped those from 6.97 incrementally half a percent a year until 2018. We were down to 4.9%. We have a very light regulatory environment under this governor. You've had to eliminate 3 regulations in order to create one new one. We have a very high standard of living. We have affordable housing. That's good for attracting talent here, along with the mention, I think it was Daniel, of the climate. We've got the best research and development tax credit in the nation. It's 24% credit on your first 2.5 million annually and 15% on anything that exceeds that. We have available land, 1 million square feet out in Buckeye with Core Power. You heard 1 million square feet in Casa Grande with Lucid. We've got an extensive transportation network, which is critical for advanced manufacturers to get their products where they need to be. Also mentioned are the great universities and the #1 community college system in the nation. And so I can't think of too many other economic development boxes to check, but we're pretty much there.
Great, thanks for that background.
And Chip, I just mentioned too, because it often gets overlooked, but Arizona actually has quite an automotive innovation background. If you look around the state, we've got proving grounds for most of all of the OEMs that's here, along with our military footprint too. So there's really, just as I say, just a really ripe environment for this to come to fruition.
Great, thanks for adding that. Daniel, let me ask you a very basic question. I know you guys are all a lot smarter than me, thank goodness. But just for the average Joe and Jane out there, tell me, and I'll go to you, Mark, next. What does electric vehicle manufacturing, how does that lower our carbon footprint? And why is that good for the average Arizona? Just super basic, but I think super important.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that we've over 100 years invested in an electric grid and an increasingly renewable electric grid, such that now is really the perfect opportunity to take advantage of that and use the most efficient powertrain that pulls fuel directly from those investments. It's just much more efficient than the supply chain that has developed to bring fuel from out of the state of Arizona into the state of Arizona to be combusted in everyone's vehicles and ultimately have the emissions having all these mini power plants running around the roads. EVs are just better. They're safer. They're more efficient, especially our car. It was an industry-wide question, but forgive me for just plugging the home team for a second. We just came out and the car behind me has a range in excess of 500 miles. And while that's a nice talking point right off the bat, the bigger deal is the way that we get there. The efficiency of this car, 4.6 kilowatt hours per mile. That's the figure that I think the rest of this industry is going to be centered around in the coming decade. It's how we get to mass adoption, because we can use less batteries to get longer range. Sorry, Mark, there's still plenty of batteries that need to get produced. But again, it's all about efficiency. Electric cars are just the next generation technology that's going to enable us to leverage 100 years worth of investment that we've already put into the state.
Great, thanks for that. Mark, let's go to you. Lithium-ion batteries. What does it do? Why is it good for the environment? What does it mean to the average person? Because a lot of people say this stuff and they don't really know what it means.
No, absolutely. So again, Core Power we're a cell manufacturer. So we are the guys that make the batteries. And, to Daniel's point, anybody can use our batteries. They are the energy storage component. So wherever some energy is generated, it can be one place, and then where it's going to be used as another. We're the conduit for being able to mobily, carry that power with us. So that's sort of the simple version of how we fit in. On the tailpipe emissions, carbon reduction piece, there's a full width and breadth of applications for our batteries to help with that reduction. It could be, as Daniel describes, in brand new luxury automobile, but it could also be with one of our other favorite customers, a repowering of an internal combustion engine vehicle. So for example, zero electric vehicles with their Sprinter van electrification program, they're removing a diesel engine, all the associated componentry, and installing a new electric powertrain, obviously with our batteries in there, and then getting that reissued as a brand new electric vehicle to as far as any state or regulatory bodies is concerned. And so that's a really incredible thing, is that because it's not just eliminating new electric vehicles from going on the road. This is actually taking them back off the road and cleaning up an existing situation. So all of those things, we can participate in many manners, but the net result is you have to have the power and be able to bring it with you.
Thank you both for that context. Super important. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the environment. The warnings about our changing climate used to seem like something far, far away, and now it seems present and pretty personal. A recent study, I think it was reported in the Washington Post, showed that at least 85% of the world's population has been affected by climate change impacts. In Arizona, we see more frequent wildfires, impacts of drought on water supply, and urban heat-related illnesses. So in case you haven't heard, I kid a bit, Congress is working on some legislation about clean energy, grid resiliency, the EV supply chain, and sustainability. There's two huge bills working their way through Congress. Let's go to Steve first. What components of this legislative package, both the bipartisan infrastructure and the reconciliation bill, do you think are most important to you and are most important to Arizona's ecosystem for the environment and for our economy?
Well, there's a plethora of things in these bills that are important to Arizona's future, but one that's relevant to this discussion is EV infrastructure. It's one thing to have electric vehicles, it's another thing to have places to charge them. And there is significant funding in the bipartisan infrastructure package to support the growth of infrastructure across the state. And we need to do that in an equitable fashion. That's something, whether you're in a small rural town or in a major metro area or going down one of our highways, you've got to be able to have access to recharging infrastructure. And so that's one of the most important and most critical elements for this industry, is being able to build that out, not just here in Arizona, which is important to all of us, but nationally.
Okay, thanks for that. Marisa, of those two bills, what would you say in your estimation are top 2, 3, 4 things that Arizona can benefit from?
Well, there's a lot of good information. I don't know if Mark and Daniel are going to want to weigh in, because there's things around battery processing and manufacturing, and a lot of stuff to do around EVs, in particular about how they relate to the grid. But, one thing that I'm really hopeful in regards to that legislation is that there's going to be, and it doesn't sound terribly sexy, but a national EV working group. And so this is where that brain trust is going to come together. And I really hope, and I'd extend a strong encouragement to my colleagues from Core and Lucid to hopefully be advocating to get your own folks on that working group, because I think Arizona has a real role to play in sharing kind of our model for a pragmatic model about how to bring business and the environment together that can be really healthy for our economy. In fact, just a plug for our sponsors. I was really in preparation for this discussion, looking back at some of the reports that they've produced over the last couple of years, their path for a healthy and prosperous future, Arizona Thrives I'm talking about, and then a recent economic briefing that they put out, which are just great foundational documents to talk about what for some people feel like just this Herculean effort to really start to combine those interests. And once you start digging into the information, you see there's just so much synergy that's going on. I'd also say that I've been participating over the past year. The utilities, along with others, have been advancing a transportation, electrification state plan. And so there's just a whole lot that we could be bringing to the table for these larger discussions, but I'll turn it over to my other colleagues to talk about the specifics of the legislation that they're also interested in as well.
Yeah, Mark and Daniel, let's pretend the White House and Congress are watching this webinar. I'm sure they are. If you had to speak to them, what would you say you want to see in these two bills? Because Mark, we'll make some calls after this to make sure the White House hears. So go ahead, make your best pitch.
Okay, well, I mean, so as Marissa says, there's a whole bunch of things in the bills that we're interested in, but you know, being on the operations side of things, I get to focus on one that's going to be the supply chain area, and so that and this is a you know, something that ranges from obviously wanting to have all the suppliers in the world on our doorstep, right outside the back door of the factory. But the reality is that, you know, you have to look at it from a global perspective. And so you have material coming from, you know, literally everywhere in order to make the battery cells, as it were. And so making that stable, especially globally, is going to require legislative support as well as you know, as Marissa again notes, industry support. And so without that, we won't be able to be as fast moving, effective, high quality as we would be without that sort of you know, interaction and collaboration.
Great. Daniel, what say you?
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody has said so far there's a bunch for this sector in these two bills, and the truth is there's probably 100 little things and a couple really big things. I'm going to take a slightly larger approach to this, which is just to say it's all necessary. It's all absolutely necessary, and the reason is that electric vehicles, as I noted before, have just reached a point of true commercialization. China knows this. The EU knows this. It's now the US's turn to pivot and to catch up. We are behind as a country in terms of embracing this industry, and that requires us to support and embrace a holistic set of policies that deal from everything from the supply chain and raw material growth all the way to consumer adoption and ownership. We need it all. And the fact that, frankly, there are some in Congress that would like to select particular provisions and to say that that's enough for this industry, I think is unfortunately looking at this through an unrealistic prism. It is true that electrification and the electric vehicle really does have its home in the United States. It has its home in the West, by the way. It's Tesla that started this in California and cited the first battery factory of a large scale in Nevada. It's Lucid and Core Power that are in Arizona, and it's an opportunity for the West as a whole to embrace this at a time when the traditional Rust Belt and the Southeast would like to again commandeer a lot of this industry. The truth is, everybody can have a piece of the pie, but it's going to require a holistic set of policies in order to make that possible.
Great perspective from both of you. Thank you. Well, that dovetails nicely into our next question about air quality, which is a significant issue in Arizona. We know that tailpipe emissions are a leading cause of air pollution. Several Arizona counties struggle with high ozone and particulate pollution. How do we take all of these great things we're talking about right now in the EV space and drive demand for more zero emission vehicles on the road? Let's start with Steve on that.
Well, I think events like this are critically important to inform the public about what's going on in the sector. They call them zero emission vehicles for a good reason, right? There's no tailpipe emissions whatsoever. One of the things we haven't talked about is the recycling of the batteries, and Core Power is thinking ahead with that and is also planning to put a plant, I think it's in Gilbert, where they're going to be recycling the batteries that are necessary for these vehicles. So, you know, you do need a holistic approach when it comes to EVs. And we're also advocates of the clean energy rules, we, the Arizona Technology Council, and it's important that those are successful too. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to develop a vehicle that's zero emissions and then develop power to charge it that's using coal or even natural gas. So huge advocates of making sure that this state is a leader in producing power in the future, energy from clean sources. And I really like this holistic approach that Core Power is using to make sure that sort of from cradle to grave, they're considering the impact on the environment.
Mark, could you talk about that Gilbert plant, the recycling plant that Steve just mentioned, if you wouldn't mind, and talk about that whole holistic approach that you guys are taking?
Well, yeah. So I'm assuming he's referring to the life cycle plant. So that would be a partnership thing for us. It's, you know, again, kind of back to the whole ecosystem piece as well. You have waste streams from your manufacturing process plant that you have to deal with, you know, as well as recycling your product when it's end of life. You also have to consider the efficiencies of the upstream part of the supply chain. So how do your raw materials come out of the ground? How long does it take for them to get to where you're at? How are those things qualified? And being able to create efficiencies there, as well as have some of those things, which again Arizona has, as far as lithium mining, those types of things. Those are also a big part of our puzzle as to how clean and how efficient, and how neutral can we be.
Great. Marisa, could you talk about what the Arizona Commerce Authority is doing to lay the groundwork or build more collaboration about getting more of these zero emission vehicles on the roads in Arizona?
Yeah, I think contributing, as Steve mentioned, to these kind of get the word out with people. Some of the surveys that we see is that although we need to get more word out about how Lucid is shaking up the paradigm as far as the distance traveled, I think that's one of those messages that sometimes the public isn't aware. And their major concerns are, what's the distance that I can go? Is it something that I need to just stick around town? Can I actually travel across state lines, make it to California with maybe just a charge? And can that charge be reasonable? Can I go to lunch, plug it in, and then by the time I'm done, be able to get going? I work, interestingly enough, even though I'm in the Commerce Authority, I work with a lot of our infrastructure operators and owners, so the DOTs around the state. And so there's been a lot of effort and activity to try to understand what the siting needs to look like, what the locations need to be. And so I think there's going to be a really important play that the state overall needs to be engaged with around infrastructure to complement what Lucid and others are doing on the issue around distance. So I think that's going to be a big deal. I also think working with groups like Arizona Thrives is going to be really critical. I know they've got intentions around a larger roadmap that could be put in place for the state on how we would start to really tackle some of those issues around getting the right vehicles in the space and getting people in those vehicles going forward in the future.
Daniel, can I ask you a practical question? Because I was talking to some friends over the past week telling me I was going to moderate this webinar, and they said, hey, I'd love to get an electric vehicle, but one, they can be a a little expensive. And two, if I'm going to drive from Phoenix to say San Diego for a weekend, talk about that, how that would look. You know, I know your car goes 520 miles on one charge, but for charging stations, how do we get over that, the fear, I think, of a lot of people who want to be good to the environment, say, God, I don't want to be stuck somewhere charging my vehicle for 8 hours. If you could just talk about those two pieces, because I know Stephen mentioned the equity piece before.
Yeah. I'm going to try and touch on a couple things with this and start at a little higher level, which is to go back to your original question about why this is so important from an environmental and a health context. It's because transportation represents the largest sector of emissions coming out of this country right now. And so cutting a huge chunk out of that, even if that leads to a small increase in the industrial side of emissions, if you're also trying to attack the energy portion, as Steve mentioned, you're really taking out a big nut of emissions coming out of this country. And that has all kinds of implications on an international scale, as well as the direct change to people's health and livelihoods here. Not to mention the economy, personal economies that can increase as a result of owning an electric vehicle. You mentioned the price is expensive. Candidly, our car is expensive. But the goal of the company is to ensure that everybody can access this technology just as quickly as possible. It's why, frankly, we're so forward about trying to license our technology to other manufacturers so that they can gain the efficiency of our technology with much more mature supply chains and larger factories and so on. But directly to your point about the practical implications, let's just say that 500 miles of range is not the everyman's car, but eventually we're looking at 300 plus miles of range. This is where you get to this dichotomy of charging that is so imperative for the investment that Steve mentioned a little while ago. On one hand, you do want people to charge over a period of 10 hours. That's what has the least impact on the grid. And it turns out that a lot of people go to sleep overnight when the energy is cheapest and there's a surplus of energy on the grid that EVs can take, making the entire grid more efficient. On the other hand, people need to get where they need to go when they want to get there. And for the traveler who's going from Phoenix to San Diego, you ultimately are going to want to recreate the type of experience that people already know around stopping at a fueling station, maybe stretching their legs and then getting on their way again. The technology isn't there today in order to enable that direct comparable of the 5-minute experience. But I would argue that that's a behavioral aspect that can ultimately be shifted. What if instead of 5 minutes, it was 15 minutes, and you knew that, so that you knew ultimately you could stop, get out, get a fresh cup of coffee, and maybe something nicer than a Three Musketeers bar in the concession stand to eat. What if there are additional business models to be created around a 15-minute experience where you can recharge 300 miles of range that can ultimately enable you to get to that destination? You start to see this opportunity not only for the private markets to engage, but also the two ends where it's most important for public infrastructure to be put in. One is on the very fast charging, enable people to get where they need to go. And the other is enabling people to charge the cheapest and to have the lowest total cost of ownership of these vehicles in their homes or the comparable substitute.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
Awesome answer. I'm going to sell my stock in Three Musketeers now, but that answer is incredible. Steve, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to add something about Lucid that really struck me. Thanks to Daniel, I got to tour both the assembly plant and the power plant, and actually was the first person outside the company to actually drive one of these vehicles. And you may not remember, but my undergraduate degree is in automotive engineering. I used to work at the Ford Motor Company, and I was absolutely struck by the efficiency of the design of these electric motors. They are sexy looking, number one, but number two, 3 times the power density of any of the competitors. And what that means is that that volume that would normally be occupied by electric motors and controls is now available for batteries. And it's another good reason that there's such a good range on this vehicle. It's absolutely an elegant design.
Awesome. Steve, go ahead, Marisa.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other thing that just hasn't necessarily come up. I've been really encouraged, literally, feels like over the last 6 months. I think almost every major automaker has expressed their intention to come out with an electric line. So what's so exciting is that we all aspire to have a Lucid vehicle, right? That's where we're all wanting to go. But at the same time, there's going to be something on the market for literally every type of driver. I mean, it used to be you just had, one model that you could look at, and now you're going to have a whole plethora of different models, different makes that can, meet any need. And I think by pulling that big diversity, that's going to really make it a really attractive market for more people.
Well, and to pile on there, we have a good collection of different types of electric vehicle manufacturers here. So we have Nikola that's making fuel cell powered electric trucks. We have zero-emission vehicles that was mentioned earlier, who's making essentially kits where you could take an internal combustion engine and convert it to an electric vehicle. We have Atlas, which has 2-wheeled vehicles, and Electromechanica that has 3-wheeled vehicles. So we have quite an assortment in selection already here just in Arizona.
Daniel, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say what Marisa mentioned is very true, but but there's even another sort of add-on effect to this. In the United States, about 30% of cars that are sold in a given year are new cars. And so so ultimately, when we talk about diversity coming in the marketplace, we need to recognize that second ownership is a critical juncture to ultimately transitioning everybody to electric vehicles. And this, by the way, is not just in the light duty context. As Steve mentioned, there's a what am I trying to say? Oh man, not enough coffee this morning. The amount of emissions coming out of the heavy duty and delivery sector it has an outweighed impact not only on carbon emissions but particulate emissions. And those trucks make their way through the supply chain over a 20 or 30 year period. Ultimately, getting new models injected into every part of the transportation network that are zero emissions as soon as possible is absolutely critical, given the lifespan of all these vehicles. Candidly, we want everybody to get into electric vehicles, but if we start pushing people into the 1 or 2 models that have depreciated enough so that they're actually very attainable to folks, you're ultimately pushing a category of individuals into an 80-mile range car. And that is going to be insufficient to enable that travel to San Diego without a lot more hurdles or even just getting around. We want to pivot everybody as quickly to this long range BEV technology.
Stephen and Marisa, what would you say are the biggest opportunities, the biggest challenges for attracting more great companies like Core and Lucid to Arizona, and also making sure that companies here already, like Core and Lucid, stay competitive, grow, and thrive? What are the opportunities and challenges? Steve, can you take a shot at that?
Sure. So I think the opportunities are what we've been talking about all morning, is that we have an opportunity to be a leader in this country in electric vehicles and all of the peripherals associated with that, including elements of the supply chain. And these are high-paying, high-quality jobs. These are exactly the kind of jobs that we want to create here in Arizona. And the challenge is the one that we've also referred to, and that is transitioning people from, over 100 years of internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. These vehicles drive differently, by the way. They're absolutely silent, and they are very fast. In fact, that the vehicle I drove is 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, which beats my Corvette by 0.3 seconds. So, these vehicles are very capable, but there's a mental hurdle to get over, and you can't discount this issue about people fearing whether or not they can get a charge while they're in transit, right? Think about all the times you've thought you might run out of gas and the anxiety that creates. That's something that has to be addressed in the mind of the public before we're going to see massive transition to electric vehicles. So great opportunity from an economic standpoint, from an economy standpoint, also to fix our climate change issues simultaneously, and some hurdles to overcome with regard to people's mentality about electric vehicles.
Marisa, you want to add to that?
I think an area that we're starting, well, we're not just starting, we've been really focused on this, but it's going to, based on some of the conversation we've had already, there's going to be a need to really be very targeted around bolstering the supply chain in our region. We're really fortunate. Mark made some really good comments earlier about the attractiveness within kind of the larger Arizona regional footprint that includes Mexico as well as California that make for really strength. But there's some real disruptions that are happening right now in our supply chain. And I was really excited to hear the big announcement that came out around the National Semiconductor Economic Roadmap that we're going to be participating in with a lot of the semiconductor companies in the state, which is, obviously a critical component that goes into even these vehicles, and kind of putting that on the level of a national competitiveness focus. And really, this is where I think Arizona has an opportunity to shine in the ways in which we're working with companies and the way that we're trying to bring that ecosystem that's so reinforcing together within our state so that companies like Lucid and Core don't just come here and set up a shop, but stay here and grow and prosper and really be able to work with them. We also need to get them on some of our marketing campaigns, because I tell you, I can't imagine two more efficient and effective spokespeople for what's going on in Arizona right now. So be excited about that. I'll make one other pitch, Chip, because one of my responsibilities at the Arizona Commerce Authority is I'm the executive director for the Institute of Automated Mobility, and Arizona has an incredible track record around automated vehicles as well. And I'm super excited to see how these synergies between EVs and AVs is starting to move. You might have saw some legislation that just came out of California relative to, I think, Daniel, 2030 new automated vehicles need to be electric vehicles. And so that's going to have a big incentive, really incentivize that whole push towards that. And so it's something that we're really excited because we think we've got a corner on the automated vehicle market as well, too.
Great. Thanks for adding that. You read my mind. Let's go to Mark and Daniel, because one of the things we hear a lot about Arizona is from many CEOs, whether it's tech, innovation, or construction, that a key part of Arizona's success of attracting companies of your level is our talent pipeline, which means we have good universities, talented people who can work. But I'd like to ask each of you to talk about your experience. How can Arizona stay relevant, stay strong when it comes to having a talented workforce? If you could be king for a day, would you bolster, community college funding? Do we need more state investment in universities? Or I would just love to hear from you guys in the trenches what you think Arizona should do to stay on the top of their game at attracting great companies like you guys. So Mark, could you take that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Core, STEM programs in the education system are so important to us. And that's ranging from I mean, all the way down into the elementary school system with science fairs, the technical content coming up through the high schools, the technical colleges, the community colleges, and then, you know, ultimately the four-year schools with graduate programs and research programs and all the other things we need. All of those things are what basically puts an employee on our doorstep, right? And that's the big deal. But then also retaining that employee and having them be able to grow and develop, you know, again, is us back leaning on, you know, the education system and the programs we put in place. And so, you know, as what from an Arizona Tech Council standpoint, I mean, the Drive 48 program, for example, that's something that's really innovative that Arizona's done, that helps support, you know, growing not just the automotive EV side of things, but also, you know, the infrastructure and support side of things. So the people that are going to work for the electrical utility, that are going to install charging stations, that are going to make the battery cells and work on the automation, and you know, support logistics, all those sorts of things. That has to be done and you know, basically curated from the state level. And so when it comes to you know, things that you know, we would like to see and fuel that workforce, you know, that's that technical STEM content. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be that everybody has to be an engineer, because that's certainly not true. But absolutely being able to, you know, technically enable a future employee or, you know, interest a younger student, it's such a powerful thing for propelling us forward.
Great. Daniel, I know you're a proud Fordham grad. So what's your education advice to Arizona policymakers?
Yes, even social studies degrees can get you in the door of the automotive sector as well. Thank you for that. I think the thing to note is Arizona's done a tremendous job in terms of laying the groundwork. Really, for any emerging industry to come in and leverage a lot of the educational infrastructure that exists. But I will tell you, I think this is one area where, frankly, we have a heightened interest, and are going to be trying to do some additional work in order to ensure that there's the right pipeline of talent that's being produced both out of the local community college level and the technical school, all the way up to the four-year degree school. It's no fault of Arizona's, but there just hasn't been a large automotive assembly employer or a battery manufacturer at scale requiring thousands, literally thousands of blue collar but well-paid jobs. And so creating that pipeline of both technical skills and management is going to be absolutely critical for our growth in the coming years, as is, frankly, and I know that this is not necessarily something that we need to champion alone, or that we are, but as is, frankly, the ability to house all of these people, and creating a system of housing that locally, if I had my druthers, if I was king for a day, such that we could enable a better quality of life for all the people that we're ultimately bringing down to work out of that facility. So this is an area where, frankly, we're going to be spending a great deal of time. As Mark noted, Drive 48 is something that we participate in. That needs to be blown up so that, frankly, we aren't training people as much after we hire them, but rather they're coming in with the necessary skill set to be directly put in onto the line. That's an optimization. That's a nice to have. But I think that Arizona offers us the opportunity to get to that point a lot quicker than what we would otherwise face in other locations.
You know, that's such a great point, Daniel. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I can remember a couple of years ago we had a roundtable we had utilities, we had some manufacturers, a group of entities around electric vehicles. And they were talking about, in particular, a number of them having emerging fleets within their operations and realizing that they were having to do all the instruction internal to their organization. So developing the curriculum for folks to maintain and operate these vehicles. And although that was inspiring in the sense of, wow, that real commitment to it, that's completely unsustainable. And this is where, really it to Daniel and Mark's point, it's really going to be a K through 14 or so approach to this. And we've already got some things that are in the works around that space. But my gosh, I've been really impressed at the community college level, how they're really stepping up. Obviously, you got Drive 48, which does need to be blown up in the right appropriate way, but there's some really cool stuff going out at Pima Community College and Mesa Community College, and it's really just creating that network so that students can be agile and flexible to go to those locations to be able to kind of get the level of instruction, and having it industry driven in the sense of having folks like Daniel and Mark intimately involved in that is going to be critical, because you want those students to come out on the other end and really be positioned to jump right into those facilities and really make a difference.
And that's also where internship and mentoring programs
and apprenticeships
interjected in there also will help quite a bit.
Well, thank you. I see Nicole is back and looks like she took a Lucid to get to the Grand Canyon. So I think we have some questions for the audience, Nicole, if you want to read those.
I do. One of the questions is related to all the commitments that the utilities in Arizona have made to deeply decarbonize our electric grid. And part of moving towards a carbon neutral future is high electrification, moving towards electrifying everything, including our transportation system, which we're talking about here. One of the questions we have from the audience is the grid going to be able to support all of this EV recharging? And I wondered if anyone on the panel could really speak to that and how that's going to work. Well,
I can start on that. First of all, as you mentioned, all three of our major utilities, SRP, TEP, and APS, have committed to be 100% net zero carbon by 2050. And so one of the things, if you've ever spent any time in the Arizona Corporation Commission, you would understand about utilities is they have to do a lot of very long-term planning. So their requirement is to anticipate the demand that or the load that they're going to have to deal with in the future and plan for it. So I have no doubt that all of those utilities are going to be putting in place the necessary capacity to be able to manage the amount of power demand that there is as a result of electric vehicles. That's their job. That's what the Arizona Corporation Commission holds them to. So does the existing grid support the kind of growth that we're talking about? Probably not, but they'll be planning for it.
Great.
I can just add on to that I do think, again, this is about optimization. This is an entirely new commodity that's going to be accessing the grid. It's equivalent to a very large electric dryer, basically. And so it all depends on when you're utilizing that appliance, right? I think if everybody wants to charge when at 12 noon, candidly, there's a lot of solar panels in Arizona that account for a lot of extra capacity at that time, such that EVs could readily charge during that period. There's also an excess of power overnight. And we haven't even talked about the advent of stationary storage, Mark, if you want to jump in there. But I think stationary storage, vehicle to grid functionality, electric vehicles just offer a much more dynamic 21st century grid, such that, yeah, to Steve's point, we're probably talking about some new generation, but we can be much more tactical about it and taking into account a whole bunch of ancillary resources, including the car itself, to maximize the efficiency of the grid to the benefit of ratepayers overall.
And that's right. And like Daniel says, and not trying to turn this into a all battery sales pitch, but there's a lot of applications for our batteries. I mean, there's a big chunk of our business has a stationary energy storage associated with it, and that could be megawatt scale, backing up megawatt scale solar installations. That may be doing commercial behind the meter things. It might be supercharging stations, or in the case of, like, say, Nikola, class 8 megawatt scale commercial vehicle charging stations. There are batteries involved in all of those things to basically balance out a lot of that demand. And again, as Daniel says, with some intelligent use of vehicles that are being charged by the grid as a whole, as opposed to kind of the way we think of fueling an internal combustion vehicle right now. That I think that will help some, but again, it all comes back to the designs, the studies, the education. All that stuff has to happen in order for kind of the man, moment, and machine to all come together. And so I think that's really important for our industry, and again for kind of our group here.
Chip, and in addition to that, if your power does go down, your Lucid vehicle could power your home.
Correct.
Oh, nice.
They can plug into your home, and they've got all the technology already embedded in the vehicle to power your home if the grid ever does go down.
Good. My 2013 Honda Pilot doesn't do that, so that's good to know. Nicole, is there another question from the?
Sure. I think there's kind of generally a discussion about this range anxiety that everyone's kind of talked about, like how far we can get, and the need to transition to 2050, the potential of hybrids, helping people get comfortable with this technology. We also have some real innovators out there in the audience who are also talking about the potential for swappable batteries, so that there isn't actually downtime. And I wondered if any of you could talk to us about that transition or technology that are helping us move along towards the full electrification.
I think I want to go back to something that Steve mentioned earlier on, which is that we shouldn't dismiss and paraphrase problems of perception. If DOT studies will say that a majority of Americans, 80% plus of Americans, drive less than 50 miles a day, or something to that. But none of us want to be restricted to a 50 or an 80-mile range vehicle. So some have looked at plug-in hybrids as being a stepping stone to full electrification, and to a certain degree, I support that. The problem that we have with plug-in hybrids is that they are amphibians, and so they end up costing more because it's two separate powertrains. Each one could run the car for a certain period of time, and you're putting both in there, which makes them less efficient. It also makes them more expensive. And so it tends, and if you don't have sufficient battery range in those, then you're just talking about dragging around an electric powertrain on a gas-powered car that's inherently, less efficient than a traditional hybrid. So to me, it was a stepping stone for the last decade, and this decade is really about getting the efficiency of fully battery electrified vehicles out there, such that true zero emission technology ultimately can be validated as the mass commercialized option. So I think that's there. I think to touch on battery swapping for a moment, there's going to be a application for that, I'm sure, in some capacity, maybe perhaps in fleet applications. But I think that there are inherently some limitations when it comes to how we as a country certify our vehicles for safety. The design of these vehicles now takes into account the batteries as part of the structural, the structure of the vehicle. It inherently makes the car that much safer because you've got this very rigid structure underneath for side impact collisions. If you start removing that and you put in a new battery pack, I think there's a lot of questions on the structure of the vehicle, as well as if you just sunk a lot of money into that car, and one of the most expensive aspects of that car was the battery, are you really going to be inclined to watch that go away only to get a battery that you don't really know what the integrity or lifespan of it is? All to say, again, it probably has some utility in captive fleet operations. And again, these are good problems to have to explore around new business models. But I do think on the light duty side, we're going to be clinging to our batteries a little while longer and trying to make them work for us as best we can.
All right, we're actually at time. So I want to thank Chip and our panelists for the conversation today. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. And I hope everyone has a great week. And thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.